Unfortunately, that's a lie. The truth is that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported just 43 pounds of fentanyl was seized at the Canadian border last year, representing just 0.2% of the total. Now, we could agree that 1 pound of fentanyl is too much. But if 0.2% constitutes an emergency, my guess is illegal drugs are coming in from every country in the world.
Hello, guys. Welcome back to the channel, where truth, justice, and real patriotism actually mean something. Today, I'm reacting to an explosive Senate exchange between Senator Bernie Sanders and a U.S. trade representative over Donald Trump's justification for emergency tariffs on Canada. And let me just say this, if you care about democracy, if you care about working people, and if you're tired of presidents using fear to grab more power, you need to see this. Because what Bernie did in this hearing, that wasn't just politics. That was moral clarity in action. Now let's watch the video.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Greer, thanks for being here, and I enjoyed our conversation in the office last month. Let me begin by saying, as I suspect you know, that I am not a great fan of unfettered free trade. I helped lead the effort when I was in the House against NAFTA and against permanent normal trade relations with China. I will never forget a visit that I made to the Macadillo area in Mexico, where I saw brand new factories and literally Mexican workers living in cardboard boxes. And the result, of course, was the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs, good-paying jobs in this country, transferring them to Mexico where people work for horrendous wages. That is the type of trade policy which I detest. But I want to move to an area to talk about the legal basis of what President Trump has done. President Trump said, Mr. Greer, that he had no choice in terms of Canada. And I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. He had no choice but to bypass Congress and to impose an emergency 25% tariff on Canada to stop, quote, the massive, end quote, amount of fentanyl and, quote, the millions and millions of undocumented immigrants coming from the northern border. Unfortunately, that's a lie. The truth is that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported just 43 pounds of fentanyl was seized at the Canadian border last year, representing just 0.2% of the total. Now, we could agree that 1 pound of fentanyl is too much. But if 0.2% constitutes an emergency, my guess is illegal drugs are coming in from every country in the world. And that gives the President of the United States incredible power to determine tariffs. Further, he said he talked about millions and millions of undocumented immigrants coming from Canada. In fact, last year there were 24,000 people, not millions and millions. First question, really, we can argue about tariffs, but why does the president have to lie all of the time in order to make his point?
So, Senator, I would just refute that when the president is talking about the nature of the emergency we have. I mean,
could you talk a little bit closer into the mic, please?
Certainly. Senator, I would just say, I think you need to look at what the president issued in terms of the order for the legal basis for what we're doing, right? I mean, the president very rightly hit on this issue of fentanyl migration coming from northern southern borders, and it's a real emergency.
Drugs are a real emergency. 0.2%. You can then argue illegal drugs come from every country in the world. If you declare that as an emergency, you're giving the President of the United States unbelievable power. Let me go on that point. Let me mention to you what you probably know. 7 Republicans have joined a number of Democrats on legislation reasserting Congress's ability to play an active role in trade and tariffs. That, on the Republican side, was led by Senator Grassley. And he said, and I quote, "For too long, Congress has delegated its clear authority to regulate interstate and foreign commerce to the executive branch, et cetera, et cetera." He wants to reassert Congress's constitutional role and ensure Congress has a voice in trade policy, end of quote. In the last 2 weeks, all we have seen is reports in the newspaper. Congress has not had 1 ounce of authority in determining tariff policy. Do you think Congress should be completely left out of the process? Or does the president have emergency power to do anything he wants with regard to tariffs?
Senator, my staff has had over 200 meetings with congressional offices in the past 2 months to consult. The president's been very transparent about what he wants to do on tariffs. Congress delegated a law to him to take this
but
action.
Mr. Greer, you can have all the meetings you want. You and I had a nice meeting. But at the end of the day, the president did exactly what he wanted to do without any discussion, formal discussion with members of Congress. He could make recommendations to Congress, that's for sure. Do you really think that he has the power under an emergency degree to reorder the trade world, global trade policy, without any input from the United States Congress?
Sir, Congress gave him this law where if he determines a national emergency, he can take appropriate action to regulate imports. That's what he's done.
And you think it's a national emergency that 0.2% of fentanyl coming from Canada constitutes a national emergency?
Sir,
do you?
The president has determined that
do you?
Canada,
I'm asking you. You're
asking me about drug policy. So I agree with the president. If you have China and Canada and Mexico putting drugs into this country at different levels, then that's an emergency. We have to deal with it.
Look, we're not going to argue about the danger of drugs. 0.2, 43 pounds of fentanyl. On that basis, the president can declare an emergency with any country on earth and take unlimited power. That's called authoritarianism. Okay? That's not what a democracy does. Do you have any concerns about all of that power going into the hands of the president?
Sir, Congress delegated this power to the president. He has to renew the emergency every year. He has to give reports to Congress. The Congress told him what he has to do to use this authority, and he's doing those things.
So, quick recap for context. Trump imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian imports under the guise of a national emergency. He said it was to stop massive amounts of fentanyl and millions of undocumented immigrants from coming across the Canadian border. Except that wasn't true. Not even close. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, only 43 pounds of fentanyl were seized at the Canadian border last year. That's 0.2% of the national total. And the actual number of undocumented immigrants from Canada? Just 24,000, not millions. That's not even half a football stadium. And this is where I want to stop and say something as a left-wing patriot. Lying to the American people to seize power is not patriotic. Weaponizing fear, whether it's of drugs, immigrants, or foreign nations, is the oldest authoritarian trick in the book. When you inflate threats to justify emergency powers, you're not leading, you're manipulating. And that's exactly what Trump did. Bernie called it out, point blank. He said it's a lie, and he's right. You know, Bernie started his remarks by saying he's no fan of unfettered free trade, and I couldn't agree more. We've seen what these trade deals have done. NAFTA, China, TPP. They told us these deals would lift all boats. But you know what really happened? American factories closed. Towns were hollowed out. Union jobs were shipped off to places where workers live in cardboard shacks and get paid cents on the dollar. That's not efficiency. That's corporate exploitation. Bernie's been fighting this for decades, and not from an isolationist, xenophobic perspective like the right, but from a place of solidarity with all working people, American, Mexican, Chinese, wherever they're being exploited by global capital. But here's where things get even more serious. Sanders didn't just stop at the lies. He went after something deeper, the abuse of executive power. Trump used a law meant for real emergencies to override Congress and impose tariffs. No vote, no debate, just a presidential decree. And that, my friends, is not how a democracy works. The Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate trade, not the president. And yet, thanks to decades of erosion from both parties, let's be real, we've let the White House accumulate powers it was never supposed to have. Bernie laid it out. He quoted Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican, by the way, who said it's time for Congress to take its power back. This isn't just a left-wing issue. It's an American issue. We're talking checks and balances. We're talking separation of powers. You know, the stuff that actually keeps us free. And then we get to the trade representative's defense. And let me tell you, it was weak. He said, well, the president has had over 200 meetings with Congress in the last 2 months. Yeah, so what? Meeting with someone is not the same as listening to them. It's not the same as democratic accountability. Because at the end of the day, as Bernie said, Trump did whatever he wanted, however he wanted, and never once consulted Congress in any meaningful way. That's not transparency. That's performative consultation. That's authoritarianism wrapped in a polite memo. So here's the bottom line. Bernie Sanders showed us what real leadership looks like. He spoke truth to power. He stood up for working-class people. And he stood up for constitutional democracy. And as a proud progressive and a proud American, I'll tell you this. Loving your country means holding it accountable. Loving your country means defending the people, not the powerful. Loving your country means never letting fear justify tyranny. We need more people in Congress who have the guts to say, no, Mr. President, you don't get to rule by emergency. You don't get to lie your way into a trade war. And you don't get to bypass democracy just because you think you can. That's not left-wing. That's not right-wing. That's American. If you agree, smash that like button, drop a comment, and hit subscribe because we're going to keep shining a light on power, holding leaders accountable, and standing up for the America that works for all of us, not just the elite.